Today we're talking about the toxic person test and why you keep attracting them and how to break the cycle. And if you're wondering why toxic people seem to find you like a GPS signal, well, I'm about to tell you something that will either make you deeply uncomfortable or set you free. There's actually a reason that narcissists, energy vampires, toxic people, and emotional manipulators keep showing up in your life. And it's not because you're unlucky, cursed, or fundamentally flawed. It's actually because you're sending out invisible signals that you don't even know that you're broadcasting. I'm Beryl, and I've been on my own healing and spiritual journey for decades now, from writing a fertility book 15 years ago that helped countless women at that stage to building my jewelry business over the past 16 years, where I've connected and chatted about these topics with hundreds of midlife women. And what I'm about to share comes from years of my own painful journey of figuring out why I kept attracting the same type of person over and over again, plus the patterns that I've witnessed through my healing and research work and my writing. And here's the thing that nobody wants to tell you. If you keep finding yourself in relationships with narcissists or gaslighters or people who drain your energy like I did, you're not the victim of random bad luck. You're unconsciously advertising that you're available for this kind of treatment. But before you get defensive, and I know some of you already are, this isn't victim blaming. This is victim empowering, because once you understand these signals, you can finally turn them off and never, ever repeat those negative patterns again. Signal one is the approval seeking frequency. The first signal that actually attracts toxic people like moths to a flame is what I call the approval seeking frequency. And if you're a midlife woman, you're probably broadcasting this louder than a radio transmitter. And here's how it works. Toxic people are experts at reading emotional needs. They can spot someone who needs validation from a mile away. And unfortunately, many of us were conditioned from childhood to seek approval from others, especially from people who were never going to actually give it to us freely. Let me paint you a picture. You walk into a room and immediately you start scanning for approval. How are people looking at you? Are you saying the right thing? Is your posture positive and powerful? Or are you dressed appropriately? Or, oh gosh, I shouldn't have worn such a short dress. Or you might even find yourself changing your opinion mid-conversation just to fit in with what the conversation's about because you sense disapproval. And toxic people see this and think, perfect, here's someone I can control. They love approval seekers because approval seekers are predictable. They'll twist themselves into pretzels to avoid conflict. And they'll forgive the unforgivable because getting cut off from that approval source feels like emotional death. Now, where does this come from? Well, usually it starts with our first relationship. Yes, the number one, with our primary caregiver. Love came with conditions. Approval had to be earned from parents, usually. We learned that being good was more important than being genuine. We developed an approval addiction. And toxic people, well, they're approval dealers. They'll give you just enough to keep you hooked, but never quite enough to actually make you feel secure and loved. And the crazy thing is that midlife should be when we outgrow this pattern, but instead, many of us actually double down on it. We think, oh my gosh, if I just try harder, finally, eventually, if I'm just more agreeable, if I just don't rock the boat, maybe they'll finally give me the love and I can earn something from these people. I've given them so much over the years and whatever. You ask yourself, oh my gosh, am I performing for applause that's never coming? Am I changing my authentic self to fit someone else's expectations? Because toxic people can smell this desperation and they exploit it. The second signal is what I call the boundary vacuum. And this one is huge for midlife women, especially who have spent decades putting everyone else's needs first and others first. Here's what I mean. If you don't have clear boundaries, you create a vacuum that toxic people rush to fill. Nature hates having a vacuum, an empty space, and narcissists are drawn to it. Think of boundaries like the fence around your property. If you don't have a fence, people assume that your land is public property and they'll walk across your lawn, park in your driveway, maybe even move in without asking. Toxic people are always looking for someone without proper boundaries because it means easy access to your time, energy, money, and emotional resources. Now, many midlife women struggle with boundaries for very specific reasons. We were raised to be accommodating, and we were told that nice girls don't say no. We learned that our value came from how much we could actually give to others to make others feel good. And we became the fixers, the people pleasers, the ones who always said, oh, it's fine, don't worry about me, even when it absolutely wasn't fine. And then we wonder why we keep attracting people who take advantage of our kindness and our love. And here's what boundaryless behavior looks like in real life. You say yes when you actually mean no, and you allow people to interrupt or dismiss you. You accept treatment that you wouldn't want for your worst enemy. You make excuses for other people's bad behavior. You feel guilty for having needs or preferences. And toxic people see this and they think, oh, jackpot. Here's someone who won't fight back. Now, I want to be clear. If you struggle with boundaries, it's probably because setting boundaries wasn't safe when you were younger. Maybe you learned that having boundaries meant losing love or facing rage or being abandoned. But here's the truth you need to actually hear is that healthy people respect boundaries. They don't punish you for having them. Only toxic people get angry when you set limits because your boundaries interfere with their access to you. A few weeks ago, I let my boundaries slip again, and a toxic person thought they had the right to verbally attack me. I was flabbergasted. I thought I had this one covered, but unfortunately, when you encounter a toxic person and you're too nice and too kind, they see an opportunity to get their fix and they attack. That person will never have access to me again. Over and out. Your boundaries aren't suggestions. They're not negotiable. They're the terms and conditions for access to you and your life. Signal 3 is the rescue complex. The third signal that makes you a magnet for toxic people is the rescue complex. And this one might hit close to home for those of you who pride yourselves in being helpers and healers and rescuers, driving the ambulance for all the broken people that you can find along the way, as a friend of mine and I actually call it, as this was her speciality in attracting toxic people for many, many years. The rescue complex shows up when you're unconsciously drawn to broken people because you believe that you can fix them. You see someone struggling and think, oh, I can help them. I can love them back to health. I can be the person who finally understands them. Sound familiar? Well, toxic people absolutely love rescuers because rescuers do all the emotional heavy lifting in the relationship. They excuse bad behavior as trauma response. They enable dysfunction by calling it compassion. They stay in harmful situations because leaving would feel like giving up on someone. Here's what I learned the hard way. You cannot love someone into being healthy. You cannot fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed and won't acknowledge it. And you cannot rescue someone from consequences that they need to experience. The rescue complex often develops when we grew up in chaotic environments where we learned that our value came from being useful, from solving problems, from being the stable one in unstable situations. We became little adults who took responsibility for other people's emotions, and we carried that pattern into our adult relationships. But here's what rescuers don't realize is that toxic people aren't looking for healing. They're looking for enablers. They're looking for their fix. They want someone who will tolerate their behavior, make excuses for them, and take responsibility for their emotional dysfunction. And they'll present themselves as wounded little souls who just need understanding, victims. But what they really want is someone who will allow them to stay dysfunctional while providing a safety net. Ask yourself, are you attracted to people who need fixing? And do you stay in relationships because you think that the person needs you? Do you confuse being needed with being loved? Because there's a huge difference between supporting someone's growth and enabling their dysfunction and their bad behavior. Healthy people want partners, not parents. They want mutual support, not one-way rescue missions. Now we'll talk about breaking free. Your action plan, now that we've identified these 3 signals, how do you turn them off? How do you stop being a magnet for toxic people and start attracting healthy relationships? Well, first you have to do the inner work and know that that's not the quick fix you might be hoping for, but it's the only thing that actually works long term. Signal 1 is the approval seeking. You need to become your own source of validation. Start by identifying your core values, not what others expect from you, but what genuinely matters to you. Practice making your own decisions based on your values and your needs, not on what will get you approval with someone else. Start small. Choose the restaurant you actually want to go to, the food you want to eat. Wear the outfit that makes you feel good, not the one that's safe or that you think the other person will like. Be more fabulous. Don't make yourself small and express an opinion, even if it might be unpopular. Signal 2 is your boundary vacuum. You need to learn the art of the boundary. So start with small boundaries and work your way up. I'm not available to discuss that topic. Well, I need to leave at 8. And if you're late, well, that's tough luck. That doesn't work for me. Remember, you don't need to justify your boundaries. You don't need to explain them. You just need to enforce them consistently. Signal 3 is the rescue complex. You need to retire from the rescuing business. Stop making other people's problems your problems. Stop taking responsibility for grown adults' emotions and choices. And this means letting people face natural consequences on their own. It means saying, that sounds really hard for you, instead of, let me fix that for you. Now, here's what will happen when you start changing these patterns. The toxic people in your life will escalate. They'll push harder. They'll try to guilt you back into the old dynamic. And you will keep encountering the odd one here and there, like I did recently. This is actually a good sign. It means that your changes are working. But it's also the hardest part, because this is where most people give up and just go back to the old familiar dysfunction. Let's discuss why midlife is your power moment. And it's actually the perfect time to break these patterns. It's because you finally have enough life experience to recognize them, to reflect on, enough wisdom to understand their cost, and hopefully enough self-respect to decide that you're done. In your 20s and 30s, you might have thought, oh, these patterns were normal. Well, I certainly did. I wasn't conscious enough to see or identify them as toxic. You might have believed that relationships were supposed to be hard work, that love required sacrifice, and that wanting to be treated well was selfish. But midlife brings clarity. You start to see that you've been giving your precious life energy to people who actually don't appreciate it and who don't reciprocate it and who certainly don't deserve it. And they resent you for expecting better. The beautiful thing about doing this work in midlife is that you get to design the second half of your life intentionally. And you get to decide what you will and you won't tolerate. You get to choose relationships based on compatibility and not chemistry with chaos. And you get to discover who you actually are when you're not performing for approval from others, and when you're not rescuing others, and when you're not sacrificing your needs for someone else's comfort or toxic behavior. And here's what I want you to understand is that you're not too old to start over, and you're not too set in your ways to change these patterns. You're not stuck with the relationships that you currently have. You don't have to stick in them. And you have every right to expect to be treated with respect and with kindness and consideration. And you have every right to surround yourself with people who celebrate your success and you rather than diminish you. The signals you've been sending, well, they can be changed. And the patterns that you've been living can also be broken. The life you've been accepting can be transformed. Your midlife reinvention isn't just about changing careers or perhaps moving to a new city. It's actually finally about becoming the person that you were always meant to be before the world told you who you should be instead. And if this resonated with you, if you recognize these patterns in your own life, you're not alone. This is exactly the kind of deep work that I explore in my book, No More Permission Required, Healing the Mother Wound and Breaking Free from Narcissists in Midlife. The foundation that we build and start to create your exciting new starting point for your next chapter is in my Midlife Reinvention Roadmap mini course. And it's such a great tool if you don't know what your next steps should be. But remember this, that the toxic people in your life aren't your destiny. They're not your fault, and you don't need to stick with them. And they're not your forever. You have the power to change the signal. You have the power to break the cycle and stop interacting with them. And you have the power to create the authentic, peaceful life that you deserve. Thanks for listening once again or watching, and I'll see you in the next one.